Welcome to the overview of MIST, the Multimodal Information Sharing Team. We look at industry and public sector cooperation for information sharing. Thank you for your time and attention. We welcome opportunities to share our findings. MIST reports for each of the ports we have visited are available for download and are freely distributable. If you have any questions or need more information, please contact MIST's Principal Investigator, Dr. Susan Hocevar, at the Naval Postgraduate School. The Multimodal Information Sharing Team, MIST, looks at information sharing and collaboration issues involved in the sharing of all hazards threat information. Our focus is on the private sector, because early on we realized that they were not adequately represented in discussions and planning efforts. The thinking at that time was that federal agencies first needed to get their act together regarding the maritime domain awareness activities, and then they could begin to engage with the commercial sector. Luckily, a representative from the Naval Postgraduate School was discussing this with a representative from the Maritime Administration, and they both identified the need to integrate the private sector's perspective sooner rather than later. That was when MIST was born. The MIST mission has always been threefold. 1. To capture local practices and challenges in information sharing. 2. To facilitate local collaborative action planning. And 3. To communicate our findings to national and local stakeholders who are engaged in improving the sharing of threat information. Our research includes day-and-a-half workshops with 30 people, polling of workshop participants, and on-site visits. Over time, our focus has shifted much more strongly to action planning, working with local port communities to help them strengthen their collaboration and information sharing efforts. To date, our team has been to 6 different locales in the United States, and we will be holding our next workshop in the San Francisco Bay Area. With each of the sites that we've worked with, we developed a greater appreciation for the different issues that are facing the private sector regarding sharing of information. In our early days, it was important that we gain an understanding of the private sector perspective, specifically their information sharing needs and their motivations for sharing. As we move forward, we started to focus much more on working with public and private sector stakeholders to understand and build what we call collaborative capacity. That is, the ability to actually work together to improve the information sharing systems. Why should we care about information sharing at all? Why do we care about the private sector and the supply chain? First of all, we do this because there are a lot of policy directives for the federal government to engage with the private sector. There are executive orders, strategic initiatives, and presidential directives all calling for active participation by the private sector in information sharing. Second of all, we care because it's important. The nation's security is dependent upon the security of our supply chain. Our commercial infrastructure is vast. Whether it's buildings, transportation, or people, a single security incident could potentially impact the flow of commerce in the United States and have cascading effects throughout our economy. The commercial domain is not a simple environment. It's a very complex system with multiple players and diverse interests. It's a world where there is competition and cooperation, where organizations compete for resources and business, and yet must cooperate to meet their goals. It is also a world in which politics is active and often results in unexpected changes in funding and in priorities. As researchers, we began our exploration of information sharing with the private sector with one primary question: how can public agencies work with the private sector to make our nation safe? But, as we mentioned, this is a complex environment. There are different geographies, cultures, and agencies. We cannot simply take what has worked in one jurisdiction and apply it directly to another. Policy has to be flexible enough to allow for localized solutions that reflect the strengths and specific characteristics of each area. The good news, though, is that when we talk about people are really more alike than not. We found that in the port environment, human motivations, what energizes people to act, are in fact quite similar. We've also found that our participants' information needs and collaboration challenges are not so different. So, what we'd like to do now is present some of the trends we've seen in the various ports where we've gathered data and conducted workshops. First, let's talk about motivations. What impacts the private sector in their willingness to share information? We know that motivation is a key component in any change effort, and that people are motivated by varying factors. When we talked with commercial stakeholders and asked them to identify what is important to them, their motivations crossed over 6 factors: financial and operational, strategic and ideological, and social and cultural. So, let's see what we've learned. First and foremost, financial factors rule the day. The private sector must justify their activities in terms of cost-benefit. Does information sharing impact efficiency, which is money? Do the information sharing activities help industry be more resilient and bounce back after a disaster with minimal loss of income? And how can the private sector minimize fines and violations and stay in compliance? For industry, it's all about maximizing efficiency and therefore profit. Financially, it's also important to industry that they maintain business advantage. Both individual companies and regional ports are looking to increase their market position and to protect assets. The last thing that any shipper wants is to lose business to a competitor port or company. For industry, it's all about the economic impact. Closely related to financial motivations is the need for maximizing operations. For industry, throughput is a key metric, and decisions to participate in information sharing are considered in terms of the impact on logistics and resources. Regulations are often seen as a barrier to the efficient movement of goods. Any information that helps the private sector focus their resources more effectively is greatly appreciated. Second, predictability helps reduce risk and improve operational planning. Consistent requirements and information that helps industry make planning and resource decisions are likely to increase the private sector's willingness to share information. And then, finally, aligning with industry's long-standing efforts to improve safety is one way to strengthen information sharing efforts. Cargo, passenger, and employee safety programs are well established and respected in industry. But industry's motivations are broader based than just their focus on economic concerns. Port facilities, shippers, and intermodal partners also have a strategic focus that is related to, yet distinct from, economics. First, like most of us, industry cares about competence. Being excellent in what you do means being credible and respected. It means having personal pride in your work, and it means providing good customer service. Excellent security and resilience in the face of a disaster can be an important part of being the best. In addition to their strategic focus on excellence, industry is also very concerned about their relationship with their local and customer communities. Community engagement impacts their position both economically and strategically. For instance, addressing environmental concerns attracts customers, builds local goodwill, and reduces the possibility of EPA fines. Positioning information sharing efforts as a common good can help build industry participation. Finally, in order to have any kind of successful interaction with industry, people who engage with the private sector need to address the social and cultural factors at each port. We can't stress this enough: the importance of building trusted relationships through frequent and personal contact. Teamwork and team cohesion are important values to private industry, and building trust is the key to successful information sharing. In addition to the importance of building trusted relationships among members of the port communities, there's a need to really understand the culture in which industry operates. That means understanding the commercial environment, how the port operates, how people interact, what tools are commonly used, and what already exists. If you don't understand what is realistic and feasible, you run the risk of alienating your stakeholders. In summary, when designing effective information sharing strategies, it's important to measure your success by looking at the outcomes that are important to industry. And in a nutshell, for industry, it's all about commerce. To motivate industry, it's important to show how you're impacting commerce. For instance, by reducing the number of delays, minimizing time at anchor, or helping to reduce the number of violations. Besides addressing the underlying motivations of your stakeholders, another key factor to consider is the quality of your information. Information systems are not used unless users can easily locate your information, understand what you're saying, and get information that is useful to them. If you build it, they may not come. So let's talk a little bit about what the private sector tells us high-quality information means to them. Industry users have to be able to easily get to your information. However, there are a number of barriers to receiving security information that have been identified. First, it is important to remove security clearance barriers whenever possible. For instance, by allowing more private sector clearances or by providing non-classified information more frequently. Second, the whole process of expiring passwords and cumbersome processes for reissuing passwords is deeply frustrating for industry. Modern web systems provide a number of best practices in password management that could be utilized here. Finally, it's important that we allow industry to have anytime, anywhere access to threat information, especially if it is pushed out to them. They don't have time to go to a website or browse around for information. Industry just wants to get information directly and quickly. Information also has to be bidirectional. The private sector wants to receive feedback after they report. Quite often we hear that those who do report incidents or suspicious behaviors never hear anything back. They don't know if what they reported is important or if it was even acted upon. Industry wants to be kept in the loop, and they want timely alerts so they can plan accordingly. Finally, in order to easily access and understand information, there needs to be standard methods. A method for centralized reporting, a move towards standardized processes, and standardized ways of collecting and displaying data. Industry wants to see consistency and understand who needs what. Another key factor in designing high-quality information systems is making your information easy to use. Modern websites and information systems spend a lot of time and effort on this aspect of usability. Because of this, your audience has high expectations for how a website or information system delivers information. And the first rule of information design is simplicity. That means clear navigation so people can find what they want, and plain language that is understandable without acronyms and jargon. And information should be displayed in such a way that people can get to the most important information right away. Industry users also have high expectations about being able to customize their interactions. Users are accustomed to going to websites to select what kinds of emails they want to receive and to specify how often they receive them and the level of detail they want to receive. Industry also expects to see information formatted for mobile devices. Simply, industry users want control over what they get. The last and the most important factor in information quality is that the information be useful. Private sector security personnel want information that allows them to mitigate the risks of threats or hazards. This information should help them monitor and adjust their business operations. It should give them the ability to look ahead and project workflow and workloads. Industry wants information that helps them to make decisions. Another aspect of usefulness is industry's desire to receive information that is targeted to their specific needs and interests. Industry wants to see threat information that is specific to their region and is structured so they can easily retrieve information that is important to them. Finally, we hear repeatedly from industry that they want information from government. The reason it's important they get information from government is because government is viewed as a credible source. Factors that impact credibility for the private sector include whether or not information is up to date, accurate, and secure. Credible information is important in keeping users coming back. We've seen this in our technology tryouts with users of the Homeland Security Information Network, MarReview, and Homeport, where out-of-date and inaccurate data frustrated users and lowered their likelihood of using the sites. Additionally, industry is sometimes hesitant to share information when sharing is perceived as being tied to regulatory power. They fear being fined or more tightly regulated due to sharing information. Industry participants in our workshops have outlined a number of indicators of information quality. These indicators include measuring how long it takes someone to get information, measuring how satisfied users are with the information, and looking at how complete the information is. The last thing we want to talk about, and really we think this is one of the most fundamental aspects of information sharing, is how communities collaborate with each other. When groups successfully collaborate, what we see is that people learn from each other. Groups have better decision-making and are more likely to come up with innovative solutions. Our first formal use of a collaboration model was in Boston in 2012. The model is based on prior research by one of the MIST team members, and it offered a way to organize factors previously identified by MIST workshop participants. This model identifies 5 primary dimensions for evaluating and improving collaboration: strategic purpose, structure, lateral mechanisms, people, and incentives or rewards. We'll use these factors in the slides that follow. So let's talk a little bit more about the role of strategy and how the public and private sectors engage in collaboration. We've already talked some about this in terms of what motivates industry, but we want to emphasize the importance of a shared understanding of strategic value. Groups may have different strategic focus areas, but research tells us that for collaboration to work well, it is important that there be a mutual respect and understanding of each group's strategic values and how information sharing efforts can contribute to their strategic goals. For industry, it's all about commerce. And supporting commerce means providing actionable information, reducing risks, and getting situational awareness information that impacts the timely movement of goods. Besides understanding the importance of commerce, industry and government participants identified the importance of adequate resourcing. In particular, participants have mentioned challenges in getting the resources to develop and maintain information delivery systems such as Homeport and up-to-date and accurate email lists. A second factor in building collaboration is making sure that both the public and private sector have clear guidance. Participants want clear roles and responsibilities and standardized classification policies. The private sector in particular wants to see policies coordinated between agencies and have policies designed with enough flexibility that changes can be made locally when operational realities require it. 2 useful structures that participants felt aided in the sharing of threat information were a strong captain of the port and explicit coordination plans. In addition to clear guidance, participants identified key support structures required for successful collaboration. First, participants noted the importance of empowering local leaders to engage in information sharing efforts. Often, an information source is built on the initiative of one person and is dependent upon their ability to maintain the connection. Having governmental support for developing and supporting communities of interest is one way that participants noted might help to strengthen and support local efforts. Second, each port has different dominant structures supporting all hazards information sharing. For instance, Area Maritime Security Committees, Harbor Safety Committees, Quality Working Groups, Port Operator Groups, and the Maritime Exchange. One of the most useful support structures we've seen is the Facility Security Officers Subcommittee of the Puget Sound Area Maritime Security Committee. This subcommittee is a formal structure that the private sector uses to engage in ongoing information sharing. Collaboration also requires adequate mechanisms to support working together. These mechanisms can include soft factors like the social capital developed through relationship building, or hard factors like accessible and interoperable communication systems, processes, and training. The participants in our research first want a unified, all-hazards approach to information sharing. They receive a lot of information and don't want to have 5 different messages coming from 5 different groups all about the same thing. Instead, they want to have a consistent message delivered across different delivery media. This means an alert can be issued to text, email, and on a website, but the message is the same message. Probably the most valued practice we see is the use of exercises. At every port we've been to, there has been a request to increase exercises and to include industry in those exercises. And not just the maritime industry, but trucking companies, rail companies, and pipeline. Intermodal exercises are the most valued form of training. Collaboration also requires that people have the appropriate skills for effective interpersonal interactions. One of the key skills that industry highlights is the need for mutual respect. Stovepiping, the tendency for agencies to become territorial, is seen as a significant barrier to developing mutual respect. In our research, we've also seen a resistance to sharing threat information with the private sector that is based on a belief by some government personnel that industry doesn't need to know. This belief is seen as hindering collaboration. A second people skill that was identified is the ability to understand the port environment. Industry often comments that new agency personnel are not sufficiently trained in port operations or are not aware of local community practices. This is especially true in federal agencies that have short tours of duty. Some useful practices we've seen that minimize this gap are the use of introductory port tours by industry, open houses by the U.S. Coast Guard, and the use of civilian personnel in government agencies to improve continuity. Finally, collaboration is improved when organizations have incentives built into the job requirements. For instance, at the Transportation Security Administration, we saw that individual employee performance measures included the number of industry visits. And at both CSX and Massport in Boston, there were either quotas for outreach or required attendance at interorganizational meetings. Research tells us that incentives are a key factor in getting people to collaborate. In order to improve collaboration within the port environment, our participants suggest that it is important to track several specific outcomes related to successful collaboration. For instance, are drills more successful? Are response times faster? Is there increased information flow? Are communities better prepared? In summary, what we found in our research is that to energize the private sector to share information, partners must understand industry's needs for efficient commerce and, in some way, address those needs in information sharing policies and processes. Second, to be effective, it is very important to make information systems easy to access and use, and most importantly, make the information useful, actionable, and relevant. Finally, if you want to create sustainable information sharing networks, ports need underlying processes and structures that support collaboration. This concludes the overview of our research to date. Thank you for your interest in MIST.